I'm excited because we're kicking off not just a new series, but this is the season of Christmas at our church. Lots of fun things happening, but the series we're beginning is called Moss, and I need to give a little context around how this series came about, because we have a tradition at our church where every year I encourage you to seek God for a word for your year. And we've been doing this in the 13 years of existence as a church. Every year we gather around, and whether it's this time or at the beginning of the year, to seek God for a word for the year. And if there's one thing that has shaped my life, it really is this practice, because it's not just about getting a word. It really is the practice and the discipline of seeking God, learning to hear from God, and giving a focus to your faith. It's one of the greatest skills you can learn, is to learn to hear God's voice. And so we take this time of year, and what I do, I begin to seek God, and I begin to pray about the things that we want to see happen in this next year. And I begin to pray for you. Many of you, I pray for you by name. I pray for all the things that you've written on your good soil offering, or whatever our offering's called that year, the year-end offering that you're trusting God for, that you're believing God for. For some of you, that might be your word, but others of you, it's in addition to that. There's things you're believing God for, but you want to see God build something in your life. So I've done this over the years and had different words. One of my words was family one time. One of my words was voice. One of them was presence. One of them was fun. Marissa's word this year was spend. I don't know if that was her word, but that's what she did. My word this year was more. It was really bad because she thought she could spend more, but my word for the year was more. And I always like to take the word that I have and just share with you some of the things that God is teaching me or shown me about it. And that's what this series comes from. I'm calling it Moss. It's just a fun way of, in Spanish, Moss means more. And of course, Christmas comes from two words, Christ and mass, not Spanish more, but comes from the worship service. It's actually a Latin, or it's an Old English word derived from Latin. And so I want to just be clear, when we're calling this series Moss, we're definitely not taking Christ out of Christmas. If anything, we're saying Christ Moss, more Christ. We need more of that in Christmas. But what you're going to see is, I believe God's going to speak to you through this series. And just to kind of give you an overview, we've got 3 weeks of this week, next week, and then the third week we're calling Moss and Movies, because we're going to do a Christmas edition of our popcorn and movies. And it's really an opportunity for me to share a message from some of my favorite Christmas movies. We did It's a Wonderful Life. We did the classic Home Alone. And I'm not telling you what this year is, so you're going to have to come and find out. But that's why I want to encourage you to invite your friends. It's a great time to invite the people in your life. And God is doing something in our church. We're seeing people baptized and come to faith in Christ. And so I just thank you for what you're doing. Well, let's get into our passage today. I want to read to you from a classic Christmas chapter, but not a Christmas passage. I want to read to you from Luke chapter 2. So if you have your Bible, you can turn to Luke chapter 2. And Luke chapter 2, it's the quintessential Christmas story. I mean, you've got the census, you've got no room in the inn, you've got the manger. You read about the angels showing up and the shepherds in the field. All of that takes place in Luke chapter 2, but we're going to miss all that. We're going to skip ahead to the end of the chapter. And in the end of the chapter, it's not so much about Christ being born. What we see in the end of Luke chapter 2 is when Jesus was with his family during the holidays. How many of you ever wondered what that was like for Jesus during the holidays? Now, clearly not Christmas, obviously. It's a different holiday. We're talking about a Jewish holiday, but it was a big religious, cultural, family-oriented holiday that had travel involved, had all sorts of events, all sorts of commitments and obligations and festivities. In fact, the holiday lasted over 8 days, and there's travel back and forth. So I want us to look at this together in Luke chapter 2, verse 41 is where I'm going to start. I'm going to read 5 verses, and then we'll read a little more, and I'll break it out. It says this: when Jesus was 12 years old, he accompanied his parents to Jerusalem for the annual Passover festival, which they attended each year. After the celebration was over, they started home to Nazareth but Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem. His parents didn't miss him the first day, for they assumed he was with friends among the other travelers. But when he didn't show up that evening, they started to look for him among their relatives and friends. And when they couldn't find him, they went back to Jerusalem to search for him there. So I'd just like to point out, if you ever wondered how Jesus handled the holiday season, it was to avoid his family. If you're looking for a verse for that, well, you got Bible, so you can use that. But more than that, I actually just want to take a moment and celebrate all the parents, because I know during the holiday season, it can feel so many times like it's just a struggle. Let's be honest. There's the demands and all the things you got to go to, and many times you can feel like you are failing as a parent. But can I tell you, can I just point out that Mary and Joseph, the couple that God chose to watch over Jesus as a child, lost him, and they didn't realize it for a whole day? I don't know if there have been parents here, you have forgot about your child for an entire day. So take some comfort in that. But I want to use this text today to talk to you about missing what matters. Missing what matters. And I don't know about you, but maybe there's some things that matter this year that you don't want to be missing under the tree. Anybody got some things you don't want to miss under the tree? Do you have like just something that's on your Christmas list that you really hope is under the tree for you? Just since this is the responsive service, why don't you just turn to somebody next to you and let them know what you really hope is waiting for you under the tree. 1, 2, 3, go. I'm gonna need somebody to get Marissa's for me and write it down. Can you do that? All right, everybody share. Husbands, you can thank me later. Make sure you get that. I'll tell you one thing that is on my list that I really hope is under the tree for me would be a new jacket. A new jacket. Here's why. Because last week I was traveling and I left one of my jackets in the rental car. It would be sad. This happens all the time. It really does. I don't think there's a trip that I've gone on that I've yet to gather everything I took with me. I mean, I've left books at hotels. I've left multiple clothing items in the back of cars. I've left AirPods. I've left phones. I've left passports. I've left money. Basically anything that matters, I've found a way to leave behind. And I'm not suggesting to you today that I've ever left one of my children behind, mostly because Marissa's sitting on the front row. I don't want to admit that. But if you ask Oliver, he might not be lying. But what I'm trying to say is, look, nobody's perfect. And I'm saying it's easy for all of us to miss things that matter. And that's what I see in this text. The truth is, even if you can't relate to leaving a child behind, leaving something behind, all of us have missed moments. All of us have missed deadlines, missed assignments. We've missed calls. We've missed appointments. We've missed meetings, and we've missed opportunities is what I'm saying. And that's why I want to bring this text to you, because I don't want you to miss the opportunity that God has for you this season. Because the reality is, in your life and in my life, there's often more that we're missing. Now, to be clear, more is not a bad thing. Sometimes we can carry with us a commercialized version of Christmas, and particularly in a church setting, it's like, you need less, you don't need more. And sometimes that's appropriate. But I just want to point out to you that Jesus was always in the habit of exceeding people's expectations. In fact, one of my favorite verses that Jesus said is John 10:10. He says, I've come that you may have life, and life more abundant. Not just life, more abundant life. He would tell his disciples when he would teach them, he says, hey, don't just do what's expected, do more than what's expected. Turn the other cheek, go the second mile. In fact, when he was calling his disciples, he said to Peter had been fishing all night, didn't catch anything, said, hey, throw your net on the other side. What happened? They caught more, so much fish, it was more than they could hold. It broke the nets. Jesus was always in the habit of doing more. In fact, Paul, when he would write the churches about the God we serve, he said, my prayer for you is that you would know God who is able to do exceedingly abundantly more than you can ask, think, or imagine. So let's just understand there's nothing wrong with more, but there is a danger to it. And the danger is that the more you can see what's possible, the more you see that you're missing. The more you see what's possible, the more you see what you're missing. They go hand in hand. Like in my own life, my Christmas list, it almost reads more like a list of pros and cons. It's like pros, all the things that could make my life great, but the cons, it's really all the reasons why my life isn't great and what I need and what I'm lacking and what needs to be fixed and what needs to be upgraded and what I want to see happen. Pros are amazing, but in this season of no eye has seen, I want to share this with you in a way maybe you've never thought of before, but the essence of vision is really the awareness that things could be better. And so if anybody ever criticizes you for complaining, just tell them, I'm not complaining, I'm a visionary. I see the way things could improve. I try and teach our staff, always keep a list of the stuff that needs to be fixed because things can be better. It's like a spiritual gift for a pastor. But I just want to give myself some credit because at least I notice. Some people don't even notice. My kids don't even notice. Like I'll go down to the basement and it's kind of like the hang room in our house, and there'll be like paper plates and candy wrappers and pop cans. It's not that they didn't do it. They didn't see it. They didn't even notice. I'm like, why haven't you thrown that in the trash? Thrown what in the trash? That right there. I'm getting out the laser pointer like Pastor Jonathan, getting out the laser pointer. That right there, throw that away. You don't even notice. And that really is the point of this text. How could you not notice that Jesus isn't with you? How could you not notice what matters? I mean, it's so easy for all of us to miss what matters. And within this text, there's three things I see, reasons why we miss what matters, and I want to point them out to you. I'll move through them quickly. And the first one is found in verse 43, where it says, after the celebration was over, they started home to Nazareth, but Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem. The truth is, all of us will miss what matters whenever we are moving ahead without Jesus. Whenever we're moving ahead without Jesus. That's what's happening here. It was while they are moving, they'd come home from the holiday, they're returning home, and it's in the middle of making progress, they don't even realize what they're missing. And what I want to point out to you is that they're not doing something wrong here. They're not doing something bad, not doing something that they shouldn't do. If anything, I actually want to give Mary and Joseph some credit here because so often, I was picking on them just a minute ago, but the fact that they were even making this trip was a big deal. Like this wasn't your little weekend trip to see the in-laws for the holidays. You gotta understand that this trip was significant. See, in the Jewish culture, there were lots of rules and regulations about holidays. Maybe you're not really familiar with Christianity. Sometimes we can have this wrong idea of Christianity that it's about a bunch of rules and regulations. It's about things that you should do and things that you shouldn't do and what you can't do. The truth is that idea comes from different laws in the Old Testament that the Jewish people followed. Well, many of those laws, if you've ever read through it, they weren't just about a bunch of do's and don'ts. God had a lot of rules about how to rest and how to celebrate. Isn't that amazing? That God knows you so well, that he knew that you would need some guidelines. Hey, take a break. You need to chill right now. Quit putting it all on yourself. Rest. Remember, I'm at work. In fact, you need to learn how to have a little fun. You're too uptight. Cut loose a little bit. Throw a party. Have some fun. Give God some glory. There's a reason to celebrate. So there's these rules and regulations. There were holidays, holy days that they were supposed to throw a party. There were 7 big ones, annual festivals. Then there were about 3 other days observed to rest and celebrate. In addition to that, throughout Scripture, you see dozens of various times that would call for a celebration. But within all these celebrations, there were 3 major holidays. It was Passover, Pentecost, and Harvest. And the way these festivals happened, it was customary for the men to make a trip to Jerusalem, especially if they live close. However, it wasn't mandatory, and what was maybe not so common is that you would bring the whole family with you, especially if you lived far away. And so I'm trying to point this out to you. The fact that they're making this trip, they lived 60 miles away. There were days of travel. This was an 8-day festival. They had to save up for this. This was like you saving up for a 2-week vacation every year. And it tells us that they made this trip every year. It's in verse 42. It says, when Jesus was 12 years old, he accompanied his parents to Jerusalem for the annual Passover festival, which they attended each year. So I just want to point out, Mary and Joseph had good priorities. Mary and Joseph were committed. They had discipline. And I want to give them some credit because they weren't negligent parents. They weren't careless parents. It happened simply because they moved ahead without him. And I wonder many times, do we do the same thing? I'd like to suggest to you that maybe you could be missing what matters, not even know it. Not because you've got wrong priorities, you've got good priorities. Not because you're doing something wrong, you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. You're just doing it without him. And this is why this message is coming to you today. Because if Mary and Joseph could miss the fact that Jesus wasn't with them, I wonder if we can too. I mean, we got the year, and we got the family celebrations, and we got the parties and the presents. All that stuff is great. I'm not anti any of that. You've got goals you're trying to finish out the year with. You've got dreams and hopes of what's going to happen in the new year, goals that you're going to wait to set till January, because, I mean, come on, we got some food to eat. But we got some goals we're going to set in the new year, things we want to see happen. Can I just tell you, don't go into any of that without bringing Jesus with you. That's why it matters so much that you seek God for a word for the year. You say, God, over my year, I want you involved in all of it. Oh, over my year, I want to see what you're going to do in my life. Oh, over my year, I want to see your hand at work. When you're giving in the year-end vision offering, good soil offering, if you haven't done that yet, what are you believing God for? That you would trust God, that he would be faithful, that he would work, that he's your source, that he's going to provide, that you're going to see his hand in your life. Don't move ahead without him. That's the first one. The second one is this. We miss him when we move ahead without Jesus, but then we also miss him when we're just assuming everything is okay. Look at this verse. His parents didn't miss him the first day, for they assumed he was with friends among the other travelers. Have you ever made a wrong assumption in your life? I'm glad I'm not alone in that. Now, assumptions aren't bad. There are certain assumptions that are necessary just to make it through life. You can't always check the credentials of the pilot on your plane. You just have to take it by faith, right? You have to assume. Assumptions aren't bad. I'm not suggesting that you should go through life as a skeptic. In fact, what I've found is that often the people that are most trusting are the ones who are most trustworthy. And so if you find it easy to trust, maybe assume, maybe that's a good quality. You're a pretty trustworthy person. But I bring it up because we can miss what matters whenever we just make assumptions. And this might be a challenge for some of you in the room, but I want to say it with all humility. Is it possible you've made some assumptions about how close you are to Jesus? Let me just let that sit for a moment. Is it possible that you've assumed that God's mercy in your life is evidence of his approval? Is it possible that you've assumed that because you don't have any conviction in your heart around that issue, that it means you don't need to change it? Maybe the reason you don't have conviction isn't because the Holy Spirit isn't speaking to you. Maybe it's because your heart has become hard. Maybe it's because your heart has become callous to the things of God. Is it possible you've made some assumptions about your relationship with Jesus? And I have to confess, even in this text, I've made some assumptions. Like I've made some wrong assumptions, because when it says they finally discovered him after 3 days, spoiler alert, you'll see that again in the resurrection. It says 3 days they discovered him. He was in the temple, sitting among the teachers of the law, discussing deep questions with them, and amazing everyone with his understanding and answers. His parents didn't know what to think, and this is where I got it wrong, because, see, I assumed that when Mary and Joseph show up at this moment, that the first thing they're going to say, sorry. I mean, you're the Son of God. We've been entrusted with a great responsibility. We weren't paying attention. You know, we assumed that you were with. I thought that's what they're going to say. That's not what happens. Look what happens. You can hear Mary say this as only a mother can. Son, why have you done this to us? Your father and I have been frantic, searching for you everywhere. And I just want to tell every mother in the room, it's not your fault. It's the kids. When you yell at them, it is the kids. And you know what? Their husband is not that, your husband's not that helpful either, because Joseph is not saying anything here. I assumed when you lose the Son of God, you're going to say sorry. Instead, she says, why have you done this to us? You know, it's funny because we're talking about Mary, but the truth is, this is actually me. Whenever I have an expectation about how something is supposed to go and then it doesn't go that way, I assume that God is the one who's abandoned me. Why have you done this to me? Where did you go? How could you let this happen? Why have you treated me this way? Am I the only one that does that? Now, just pastor confession time here. I assume that God did something wrong. It's assumption. And so we assume everything is okay with us. I'm good. Problem must be with God, either in where we're at or what we're doing. And it brings us to the third one. I want to move through this one quickly. Well, they couldn't find him. They went back to Jerusalem. I want you to look at what Jesus said to them in the next verse, verse 49. It says, but why did you need to search? Didn't you realize that I'd be here at the temple in my Father's house? In other words, we'll miss what matters whenever we're searching in the wrong place. Now, it'd be real easy at this point in the sermon to try and make a connection here about, we're looking in all these places for fulfillment, and all the presents, and all the gifts, and all the parties. We forget the real reason for the season, but one of the things you're not going to get from me and you're not going to get in this series is that you need to scale back. I'm talking to you about more. I'm talking to you about Moss. And one of the things I believe is that big days should be celebrated big. Christmas is a big day. There's nothing wrong with celebrating big on a big day. Think about this for a minute. The unique thing about Christianity is that God came to our world. He came in the flesh. He came in the material. That's what the incarnation is, that God wrapped himself in flesh. He brought dignity through his divinity to the material. And a real incarnation deserves a real celebration. So I'm telling you, as you celebrate, there is nothing wrong with going big. There's nothing wrong with the presents. There's nothing wrong with the tree, with the music, with the parties, with the fudge, with the food, with the cookies, with the eggnog. There is something wrong with fruitcake. Don't go there. But there's nothing wrong with the stuff. Jesus came to a material world. The stuff is okay. Do fun stuff. Do it guilt-free. However, in all of our effort to celebrate with more, we can miss what matters, because sometimes with the more, it's a reminder of what we don't have. That's what I said at the beginning. If you're anything like me, the Christmas list looks like pros and cons. It's a reminder of all the stuff that I don't have, what I would like to do that I can't do, what I want to do that I'm not able to do, the resources that I don't have, the places that I'd like to go. It's like pros and cons, except on my list, all I see is cons. What I can't do, con. What I don't have, con. I wonder if on your list, you're like me, all you see is cons. All you see is deception. All you see is lies. Maybe that's why instead of having a con vision, we need to have provision. And it reminded me of our verse for this season. It's on the wall out there when you look at it. The season of no eye has seen. It's a prayer that Paul prayed for the church in Ephesus, but I told you Paul prayed in Ephesians 3:20 that they would know God, that they would see him doing exceedingly abundantly more. But before he ever prayed that they would see God do the more, he prayed our theme verse. Let me read it to you. In Ephesians 1, he says, I pray that the God of Messiah Jesus, our Lord, the Father of glory, would give you in your spirit the gift of seeing things people can't normally see. Because you're coming to know him and to have the eyes of your inmost self open to God's light. Then you will know exactly what the hope is that goes with God's call. I like this because instead of seeing what I'm always missing, maybe you're like me, you see what you're missing. You see what's not there. Instead of seeing what you're missing, Paul prayed that you would see what others miss. It's a different perspective. And that's what Jesus was pointing to here. This verse where he says, why did you need to search? Didn't you know I would be here? I want you to know that that's not about a location. It's an invitation. You don't need to search. If you feel like you're missing what matters, this is the first recorded words of Jesus, where he said, I had to be in my Father's house. Wait, I thought wouldn't Joseph have seen himself? No, Jesus came to show us the Father. You're missing what matters. Moving ahead without him, assuming everything is okay, searching in the wrong places. He says, you don't have to search. you're welcome right here.